Okay, so on this class, we're studying the book of James. A few people have asked. The book that I'm using it's the cornerstone of our faith. Tommy Brooks is the author. This particular, he has 3 in the series. This one is Looking at the Man in the Mirror, a study of James. If you get this book and look at it, I may not actually use it. I use it as a kind of a point, a reference, and some of the things that are there. So I may not actually stay on that for a bit. But tonight's subject, though, the topic we're going to be looking at is James chapter 2. And we're going to start with verse 14. And basically, this title of this week's class is Faith Without Works is Dead. And so as we look at this passage today, we're going to look at James 2, 14 through the end of the chapter. But one of the points that I'll make is that in these few verses, 14 through 26, 3 times James says, faith without works is dead. And when I think about that, I think in Galatians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, Paul says in those 2 verses, he says in verse 8, but even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. And I always thought it was interesting that 2 verses back to back, Paul reiterates that point that basically there are false teachers out there and that we should beware and take those folks at face value, but to be cautious. As we then look at James chapter 2, if we start with verse 14, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but do you not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. That's the first time. But if someone will say, you have faith and I have works, show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? The second time. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled which said, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for his righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. 3 times in that short passage, James is making the point, obviously, that faith without works is dead. So when we think about faith, what is faith? How is faith described? Right. So faith, basically, we can look in Hebrews, and we will, but basically faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So basically we have faith in things that we haven't seen. And so what James is making the point here, so if you think about, what are works? What else can we describe works as? Actions? What? Deeds? Say it louder. Prayer? Yeah, prayers. That's something that we're doing. Obedience to God. So if we think about when we look at what James is talking about here, faith without works is dead, and we look at those works, what we have to do. And as I was preparing this, I was thinking, and some of mine that I have, I was thinking about love. And I was thinking about most of us who are married. When we started our relationship, how would it have worked if all we did is talk on the phone? That's what they do now. Well, we didn't have phones like they have now then, but think about if in a relationship, if all there was communication over a phone, no action, if you will, no opening the door for someone, no getting dressed up, actually putting on aftershave maybe or cologne, but love is action, right? If we say we have love, there's action. There needs to be action involved with that. And so when you think about what James is talking about with our faith, he basically, in this passage, he's going to make 4 cases. And we'll look at those 4 cases that he makes. The first case is, obviously, faith without works is dead, as we look at verses 15 through 17. Before we start there, one of the other points that I wanted to make was in John 13, verses 34 and 35, we have basically Jesus telling us, a new commandment that I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. Now what I wanted to do tonight, with it being close to after Halloween, I was going to get a couple WWJD bracelets, and I was going to get a necklace with the cross on it and wear it, that hung down about here. What would that show you about me if I had those bands on and a cross? That's why I didn't do it. I didn't spend my money, so I'm just telling you about it. Sorry, I'm cheap. I don't know who all follow, but Mike Liddell, the My Pillow guy. When you see him talk, what's usually on him when he's talking? A cross. I mean, he professes to be a Christian. He's done it at the White House, and that's how he lives. But he does profess it. And my only point there is, if I look it, does that make me it? Not at all. Not at all. So when we think about the image that we obviously want to have an image. We want people to see and tell by our actions how we are. And I think when we look at John 13, that's what Jesus telling us. That if we want people to see that we're Christians, it's not by what I put around my neck, or what I wear on my arm. It's how I am. It's how I dress would tell you one thing about me, but it's how we interact with one another and how we treat people. In most cases, most of us, if we're out in the world, we're not with our brothers and sisters, but we still can treat people as Christ would treat those people. And so I think it's important then that as we look at that, as we look at our lives and what we do, our actions are important. In 1 John 3, verse 18, it says, let us love in word or in tongue. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And so, again, it's easy to say I love you, or I have love for Christ, I have love for the church, I have love for Christians, but don't ask me to do anything because I'm busy, I'm tied up, or I'm doing something else. And so if we say we have love, then our actions have to show that. If we say we have faith, our actions have to show that. And in the first case that James points out there is he shows us people who are in a tough spot. It says that if we see, verse 15, if a brother or sister, and now, again, James is writing to Christians, and so this is a Christian. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, how bad is that? Now, that's not, I can't make a house payment, or, I can't do this or that. I mean, when you think about somebody who is naked and basically without daily food, they're in a bad spot. And the point that he makes is that if one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for their body, what does it profit? How many of us, if we think about that, would do that if we saw someone in that type of situation? Hopefully none, but But what do you think James is pointing out there to us as Christians today in Grove City, Ohio? I mean, obviously, let's hope we don't have brothers and sisters coming in that type of situation. But okay. But what's the problem, Kathy, when we have pride and we don't show that we have a need? I mean, obviously, our job as Christians is to look out for one another. And my point here is not many of us are going to walk in that type of situation where we're that destitute. But we still have needs. We have brothers and sisters who have needs, and we have ample supplies to help, but you can't help if you don't know. So, I get, and I make a point a long time ago when we were in Indianapolis, when we lived in Indianapolis, and we had 3 children, and I lost my job. One of the deacons found out about it, and we didn't broadcast it and really wasn't worried, but they came with groceries. I mean, we didn't ask for. They just came, knocked on our door, and brought groceries because there's a family with 3 kids, and the main breadwinner lost her job. They're just assuming, and that's okay. I mean, do we do that? Now, maybe we do it individually, but what's our job as Christians? How do we look out for one another? And what should we do as a church body for our family and the needs that they might have or not have? Comments? Questions? Melinda?
I think that we, as a family, came to the realization when we needed help to not be so prideful not to ask, because sometimes it's the other Christian's way of doing works.
Right.
So if you ask, if we would come to you and say, we need help moving or whatever, if we don't give you that opportunity, we're taking away from you
Good point.
that opportunity to work.
Good point. And what Melinda said, if you didn't hear that, is that basically sometimes when we let our pride stifle our desire, our needs, we don't give Christian brothers and sisters the opportunity, and remember that when I move, remember there's an opportunity for you, but there's an opportunity that we're not allowing our brothers and sisters to do. So, and we've had that several times where there will be an announcement made that someone's doing something and they need help. And that's where we should go. We should have what we have here. And I've made that comment to people before who, when they don't have this body of Christians that help and support, they don't understand what Christianity is about. But that's what it's about. It's seeing our brothers and sisters with a need and fulfilling that need. That's actions. Because I can tell you, we can show our faith, but I'm not sure that just coming here and sitting in the pew week after week after week after week after week after week is showing our faith. So, anybody want to comment on that? Yes. Sure. No.
But what I'm saying is that Ephesians is different.
Right.
It means me being out being good and helping old ladies across the street, something like that. It's not going to save me.
Right.
But in James, I'm going to have righteous words.
Right.
Meaning I need to be obedient to the gospel, what the gospel says. Those are all words. My belief, my
Right.
confession, my repentance. All that is a word of righteousness.
Right.
Then once you are a Christian, then you're going to be your works are going to show that
Yeah.
you truly follow the faith.
What James is referring to is it's a working faith that's a saving faith. And what Tony talked about there is a lot of the denominational will talk about how we can be saved by our works. And what saves us is grace. Faith. They say faith only, and I believe when the only time faith only is ever used is here in James, and it's not used to say faith only saves you. But there are those who believe faith only, and that's not the case, because this clearly points out, and that's the point I'm making about if we say, is our faith really showing our faith because we sit in the same pew every Sunday or Wednesday? Do you think James is saying to you as a Christian and showing our works that showing up for checking you off? I mean, the ushers have us, and we'll get 100% pen because we were in attendance. Jimmy?
What you say about denominational Ephesians chapter 2 here? They're saying you can't be saved by works.
Right.
But the best place to show people that is turn to John chapter 6.
John chapter 6.
Yes. And verse 28 and 29.
Okay.
Says, then they said unto him, what shall we do that we might work the works of God? Jesus answered and said unto them, this is the work of God, that you believe on him whom he has sent.
Okay.
So they're saying you can't be saved for works, but there's none of them say that you can't be saved without believing.
Right.
But believing is a work.
Right. And believing that's the only thing.
God,
Right.
But it's a work.
Right.
And so
Right.
if somebody tries to teach that,
Yeah.
then come to John and show them that believing is even a work.
Yeah. And part of the book here, it talks about Mark 16:16, and it basically says that he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. So, in those who believe it's belief only, Mark 16:16 shows that you have to be baptized in order to have the opportunity to go to heaven. Anybody else? Okay. So when we think about what James is saying in this first case, where faith without works is dead, and we look at, he's talking about how we handle situations with our Christian brothers and sisters. And I think what's important there is that there's words. Hey, Tony, I'm sorry you don't have gas. I'm sure it will work out for you. And I walk away. Has that helped him? Does he feel better because I said, I'm sure you'll make it? Yeah. No, that's not. So it's important, and I think that in 1 John 3, I think I have it written down here, but I think it's verse 19, it talks about if we have the means to help, and we don't do it, that's even doubly bad. 17? Okay. Go ahead, read it if you will.
Whosoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him?
Okay, and that's 1 John 3:17. Yeah, so I had 18, where it's just you have to have the deeds also. But there, it points out, especially if we have the means and we don't do it, that's even worse. So, and we think about what most of us have in America, the jobs that we have and the opportunities that we have. It's important that we do take advantage of opportunities that are given to us, and we've done that. And we've helped those in then the hurricane. And just a quick update on that, like I said, we sent $11,000 and we've collected another $1,000. We haven't dispersed it yet, but we are still collecting, but we have another $1,000 to send at some point. So we will do that. We can say we love Jesus all that we want, but our words, faith, most of Americans believe that they're Christians, don't they? I mean, this is a Christian society, and most people surveyed, most people believe that there is a God in heaven, and they believe in Jesus, but are there any actions to those words? And there's really not. I mean, when we look at attendance today in churches around the globe, around the United States, and where people think that they can just be good, we've talked about that before, it doesn't work. So we could say we believe in something, but if there's no actions, then it's dead. The real faith that James talks about is in verse 17 that we looked at, and it basically says that Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So again, I can say all the things I want to say. I can dress a certain way. I can wear things that tell you who I am or what I do. But if I'm not living that, if there's no actions to follow up with that, then it's in vain. It's dead. Second case that he makes is belief only is useless. And he uses verses 18 through 20, and it says, "But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead?'" So again, now James is using belief only, and he's referring there and putting it in terms, again, that everybody can understand. Some translations say the devil. In the New King James, it says demons. But the point that he's making is that they know there's a God. Does Satan know there's a God? Sure he does. Yeah. And James says, and they tremble because they know what God has waiting for them because of what they've elected to be, what Satan has elected to do, and then those who follow him, what they've elected, they know what's waiting them, and they tremble. So you think about the demons, the devil, and they tremble because of what they know of God. But then think about how we just talked about how people believe because they're good. Are they trembling? People who aren't attending church, are they trembling? No, because Satan in their mind says, it's all good. It's all good. You don't have to do that. You don't have to give money. You don't have to go to church. You just have to believe. And that's not the case. So what the second point that he's making there is that belief only, it doesn't work. You have to have actions with your words in what you say and what you do. Anybody want to make points about that? The third case that he makes then is, he says in verses 21 through 24, "Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled which said, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only." Wouldn't it be good to be known as a friend of God? Wouldn't that be nice to have on your tombstone? Ned Harold, friend of God. But that's what it says about Abraham. And why? What did Abraham do? He was willing to sacrifice his son. That's in Genesis 22. We won't go through the whole thing, but if we look at that, we have where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his only beloved son that he's waited all this time for. And it says the next morning, first thing in the morning, Abraham got up and did it. I mean, he got up, got two of his hired hands and Isaac, and they took off. They cut the wood for the altar, and they left. How many of us would have jumped to it that quick? Would have been easy. It's like when your spouse asks you to do something. It's kind of like, yeah, I'll get to that. I'll jump right on that. We might kind of delay a little bit. Maybe she changes her mind. But think about Abraham. I mean, this is a tough task that he's been asked. But because of his faith and his works, he got right to it. And we all know, he went, and basically he was told to go, and then he would see where to go, and he saw the mount. He told the young men to stay there, and he and Isaac went up. And Isaac says, Dad, we got the wood, we got the fire, what are we going to sacrifice? And what did Abraham tell him? God will supply. Abraham knew that if he went through with and sacrificed his son, in his mind he was certain that God could heal him, could bring him back to life. Not once did he question and do, and he was to the point of knife in the air, and then an angel stopped him. And then what's said about him? Now I know that you have the faith. So when we think about works and faith, Abraham shows us how we should be. He was a friend of God. Comments on that? Okay. Next case that he makes is Rahab. And then in verse 25, likewise was not Rahab, the harlot, also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. You know, when you think about the two examples that James uses here, he uses Abraham. Who was Abraham to the Jewish people? Patriarch. So he was Father Abraham. He was the patriarch. Who was Rahab? Yeah, she was a Gentile and she was a harlot, prostitute. So James is showing us from one extreme to another. I mean, he's showing us that the top of the ladder and the bottom of when you look at, and last week we talked about partiality and showing favoritism. And this shows that when you look at this, the examples that he's given, it's from the high end and the low end. And what Rahab did is when, and we'll read a little bit because I think it's interesting that when we look at what Rahab did in Joshua chapter 2, and basically it says that he sent 2 spies out. So they came to the house of the harlot named Rahab and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country. Then the woman took the 2 men and hid them. So she said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And it happened that the gate was shut. When it was dark, then the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you may overtake them. But she had brought them up on the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. Then the men pursued them. But the point I want to make is that basically what she says to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Now remember, this is a Gentile living in Jericho, and she's a harlot. And she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of all of us has fallen on you, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water in the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Shai, Hag, and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did they remain any more courage in anyone because of you, for the Lord your God. He is the God of heaven above and on earth beneath. Think about what she's saying, and how were the children of Israel, how were they? Were they believing that? No. What happened to the children of Israel most of the time? They kept backsliding and falling away. But here is really, she's telling these men that the city basically is trembling because they feared the God of the children of Israel. But the children of Israel didn't understand the power, even though they saw firsthand the power of God, they didn't take advantage of it. In the same way we have people today, especially those who have been members of the church and who have fallen away. They see what could be, but they lose that. And so then it goes on, and basically she makes an agreement. She tells them what to do. She lets them down. And basically they say to her, in order for you to be saved, your whole household has to do what? They have to do something. So it's not a matter of, yeah, okay, we'll take care of them. They have to be in your home, and there's another action required. What's that? Yeah, the flax that she put them down with, that has to be around the window. As long as that's the case, then they will be saved. And that's the works that saved Rahab. saving it for a later day, but when you look at the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, there are 4 women listed. 4 women listed in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Rahab was one of those. So when you think about your bloodline and trying to keep it pure and clean, that's not the case with some of the women that are in that list, including Rahab. Okay? So justified by her faith was Rahab. You know, it takes actions for what we do, and I had thought about this before, and then Jonathan preached on it Sunday night. If we look at Ephesians chapter 6, as we look at our Christian life, in Ephesians 6, starting with verse 11, it tells us, well, let's start at verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to the end with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. And so when we think about what James is talking about here with our faith, that we have to have works with that to prove that works is action. We talked about love is action, works is action. And then we think about our daily, and that's what I think of when I think of Ephesians 6. I think about daily how we should put on. You know, when I get up, there's certain things I do, take a shower, deodorant. I do wear deodorant, but I go through a process. So in the same way as Christians, we should do the same thing as we're Christians. You know, did we pray before we left in the morning when we got up? Did we thank God that we had a peaceful night, or we at least woke up in the morning? So it's important when we think about the life that we live and what James is telling us here, and we look at the cornerstone of our faith, and what the whole cornerstone means is the security that has, that we have to have a working faith. Comments?
I heard once from a Bible class, and they said that Jesus didn't die on the cross for us to come and set the view. I mean,
Okay, good point. What Joyce said is she had some good teacher talked to class and said that basically that Jesus didn't die on the cross so we can come and sit in a pew. Now, again, we want to come to church, but if all we do, so if on my resume as a Christian I say, Ned Harrell was a Christian since blah, 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 and I've attended blah, blah, blah services, and I've gone to youth rallies, and I've done this, and I've done this, and but all of it is here, but I don't have any going out. I didn't feed the homeless. I didn't. So if we're banking on this is my resume builder here, then we need to really study. We need to think about what we're doing, because as Joy said, as the teacher said, Jesus didn't die just so we could be in a comfortable building with air conditioning and heat and live streaming and all the things that we have, which are nice, but that's not that's not a working faith. A working faith is out there doing it, be amongst. And we have opportunities here. We have opportunities to do that. Every week we have visitation program where you have an opportunity to, and maybe it's writing a letter, a card, sending a card or whatever, but we have opportunities to put our faith in the works into action. Yeah, 1 John 3:17 I have here, but also Acts 20 verse 35 says, I have showed you all things, how that so laboring you ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So when we think about what Christ stood for, and I think when we look at what James is saying here to us in the book of James, that it's important that we look out for one another In James 1, we have where we're to count it all joy if we face trials and tribulations. Again, that's making assumptions that we're out there in order to have those trials and tribulations. We're told it's sinful to discriminate, basically. Last week we talked about that we can't discriminate, that as Christians we can't see black, white, yellow, anything like that. I wanted to do a PowerPoint, but I'm not good at it. But last Sunday, Amanda always sends us pictures of the kids in church. So Stella and her girlfriend, which happens to be a black family, and Donovan with the brother. So they're in the pew, and there's Stella and her girlfriend with their arms around each other. So there's 2 6-year-old girls, one white, one black, who they don't know color. They know they're friends. And that's how it should be as Christians. We shouldn't have as a Christian, that should never be part of our makeup. And then we look then into the second part of the chapter, and he's talking about faith without works is dead. And then he gives us examples, a lot like Jesus' parables. They were easy to understand. James is doing the same thing. Last week we talked about the rich person coming in to the assembly, and then the poor person and how we treat them. Tonight he's talking about how a brother or sister who is naked and destitute, and we just say to them, have a good day. Just go get them. Yes, Debbie.
I'm also wondering too, a lot of times, we have our friends or whatever that we have within the congregation, and sometimes we get stuck on just what their needs are, and sometimes we don't break out and say, oh, well, I don't know so-and-so very well, maybe I need to go be helping. And it gives you an opportunity to meet them and do something for them, and that's how you meet.
Yeah, and what Debbie's saying is sometimes we get comfortable in our groups, and that's kind of what we're doing with the visitation program, where there are different families and then they rotate it, so that way it's not always the same people. I would hate to think that I would get to heaven and then somebody says, well, I think I went to church with that guy. And say, wait, you did? So, yes, it's important that we know our family. And the only way we'll know our family if they have problems is if we know them. If we know that, hey, this person, they had to take early retirement, or they have health issues, or whatever it might be. And again, like we said earlier, because of pride, we may not put that out there that we have those needs. But if we know like we should, then we would be able to do those things and help. But that's a good point. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll go back to the book and answer the questions. What does James refer to as false faith? What's false faith? Yep, that's faith without works. It's false faith. It's dead. And I won't ask you, do you know anyone guilty of this kind of faith? And are you guilty? So we won't. That's not. So what is true faith? What is true faith? I'm sorry, you said? Faith with works. So our true faith is faith with works. And how does true faith change us? How does going to Costa Rica, how did that change you, Jimmy? Tony, how did going to Costa Rica change you?
Makes you appreciate what you got, and makes you understand that there's people in the world that need help.
Yeah, so going to Costa Rica, where obviously when they've made the presentations, there are people there that have very little, and it makes you appreciate what we have here, but it also gives us an opportunity to help some of those. And we do. We support, still support a group in Costa Rica. Okay. Simply professing that you believe in believe in the one God is meaningless. So we're saying that simply saying I believe in the one God, if I say that's meaningless. You've got to show it by your works. So just to say it doesn't get it. There's got to be actions there. Give examples of people who are known for their faith and works. We can look at Hebrews chapter 11, but our time's up. So any last comments? Going once, going twice?